Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. This daily show is taking it 1 year at a time, looking at American events from, today, 1807. We're continuing this show all the way up to July 4th of 2026, when we'll have all 250 years of American history recorded. Now, sometimes stories span years before coming into the public knowledge, and small details and seemingly passing relationships culminate into a major event. One such event is the main topic of today's episode, a conspiracy that reaches to some of the highest places in American government and connects many stories that we've already covered. Today, we discuss the Burr Conspiracy. In addition to that, we'll be looking at the Chesapeake and Leopard clash that occurs off the coast of Norfolk and increases the tensions between America and Great Britain. Welcome to 1807 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and the Carriers of New England post a New Year's Day address on a broadside in Boston, which reads, in part, "Our good friend Time, still on his way, proclaims again a New Year's Day, a day which most devout to joy, excluding bitters care alloy. To crown your wine and smoking dishes, accept the carrier's hearty wishes. If single you desire a wife, to share the joys and ills of life, O may you have a beauteous creature, yet one whose mind excels each feature, and may she prove whene'er she come, nor garrulous nor yet quite dumb, and meet with you from your daily toil, with open arms and a cheering smile. May fate top off your wedded joys, with lovely girls and lively boys." Now let's head into the main story of today's episode. It's February 19th of 1807, and former Vice President of the United States Aaron Burr is arrested in Alabama on charges of treason and sent to Richmond, Virginia to be tried in a U.S. Circuit Court. How did we get here? Well, it has been 220 years since the following story has come to the attention of at least some of the American people, and while the details are clouded in mystery, contemporary writings, private messages, and modern historical analysis all lends a hand in creating the picture that I will present here. As is always the case with this show, I will be reading quite a bit from the primary sources that I have found in researching this particular event, so I do truly hope you all find this as interesting as it is to me. You'll of course recall that, while still serving as Vice President, Aaron Burr shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel in July of 1804. With Hamilton died Burr's political future, at least in the United States. Despite the public destruction of his reputation, Burr saw a chance to revive his fortunes, setting his sights on the newly acquired territory of Louisiana. The land is mostly unsettled. Its borders are disputed by Spain, and many of its residents talk openly of secession. Burr believed that with a relatively small and well-armed military force, he could pry territory from Louisiana and build his own empire. Of course, Burr would need manpower to accomplish his objectives, and we now know his co-conspirator was none other than that of General James Wilkinson, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army. In August of 1804, the Vice President contacted Anthony Merry, Britain's minister to the United States, to offer help to Britain to take Western territory from the United States. Merry immediately sent a dispatch to Britain detailing Burr's offer to effect a separation of the western part of the United States from the rest of the country. In return, Burr wanted money and ships to carry out his conquest. In April of 1805, shortly after his term as vice president ended, Burr journeyed west on a reconnaissance mission. In town after town, he dropped hints of the expedition to come, and in town after town, he met men that he believed would support him in his enterprise. One of these men, Harmon Blennerhassett, would prove to be a loyal follower. Burr continued his western odyssey, visiting General Wilkinson at a western fort before heading south to New Orleans. By the time Burr returned to Washington in November of 1805, he had enlisted a number of supporters, including former U.S. Senator Jonathan Dayton and members of the Mexico Society, a group who favored annexation of Mexican territory. Support from the British had not yet arrived. In fact, it never would. Burr sent a coded letter to Wilkinson outlining his plans to use the broader conflict with Spain as cover for the plot to seize control of southwestern lands by force, and by the end of last year, Burr's plan was in total collapse. As we read at the end of yesterday's episode, Wilkinson, who believed that Burr's plan that he was involved in would now fail, opted to save his own skin and sent that letter to the president in which he doesn't name Burr, but he does outline the plot. After this initial letter, Wilkinson continued to provide updates as he learned more about the plot, and on the 22nd of January, President Jefferson addresses Congress in his first public disclosure of the information that he's been receiving from Wilkinson. We'll hear that address now. I proceed to state, under the reserve therein expressed, information received touching an illegal combination of private individuals against the peace and safety of the Union, and a military expedition planned by them against the territories of a power in amity with the United States, with the measures I have pursued for suppressing the same. I had for some time been in the constant expectation of receiving such further information as would have enabled me to lay before the legislature the termination as well as the beginning and progress of this scene of depravity. So far as it has been acted on the Ohio and its waters, from this the state of safety of the lower country might have been estimated on probable grounds, and the delay was indulged the rather because no circumstance had yet made it necessary to call the aid of the legislative functions. Information now recently communicated has brought us nearly to the period contemplated. The mass of what I have received in the course of these transactions is voluminous, but little has been given under the sanction of an oath, so as to constitute formal and legal evidence. It is chiefly in the form of letters, often containing such a mixture of rumors, conjectures, and suspicions as renders it difficult to sift out the real facts, and unadvisable to hazard more than general outlines, strengthened by concurrent information or the particular credibility of the relator. In this state of the evidence, delivered sometimes too under the restriction of private confidence, neither safety nor justice will permit the exposing names, except that of the principal actor, whose guilt is placed beyond question. Sometime in the latter part of September, I received intimations that designs were in agitation in the western country, unlawful and unfriendly to the peace of the Union, and that the prime mover in these was Aaron Burr, heretofore distinguished by the favor of his country. The grounds of these intimations being inconclusive, the objects uncertain, and the fidelity of that country known to be firm, the only measure taken was to urge the informants to use their best endeavors to get further insight into the designs and proceedings of the suspected persons, and to communicate them to me. It was not till the latter part of October that the object of the conspiracy began to be perceived, but still so blended and involved in mystery that nothing distinct could be singled out for pursuit. In this state of uncertainty, as to the crime contemplated, the acts done, and the legal course to be pursued, I thought it best to send to the scene, where these things were principally in transaction, a person in whose integrity, understanding, and discretion entire confidence could be reposed, with instructions to investigate the plots going on, to enter into conference, for which he had sufficient credentials, with the governors and all other officers, civil and military, and, with their aid, to do on the spot whatever should be necessary to discover the designs of the conspirators, arrest their means, bring their persons to punishment, and to call out the force of the country to suppress any unlawful enterprise in which it should be found they were engaged. By this time it was known that many boats were under preparation, stores of provisions collecting, and an unusual number of suspicious characters in motion on the Ohio and its waters. Besides dispatching the confidential agent to that quarter, orders were at the time sent to the governors of the Orleans and Mississippi territories and to the commanders of the land and naval forces there to be on their guard against surprise, and in constant readiness to resist any enterprise which might be attempted on the vessels, posts, or other objects under their care. And on the 8th of November, instructions were forwarded to General Wilkinson to hasten an accommodation with the Spanish commandant on the Sabine, and as soon as that was effected, to fall back with his principal force to the hither bank of the Mississippi for the defense of the interesting points on that river. By a letter received from that officer on the 25th of November but dated October 21st, we learnt that a confidential agent of Aaron Burr had been deputed to him with communications, partly written in cipher and partly oral, explaining his designs, exaggerating his resources, and making such offers of emolument and command to engage him and the army in his unlawful enterprises as he had flattered himself would be successful. The general, with the honor of a soldier and fidelity of a good citizen, immediately dispatched a trusty officer to me with information of what had passed, proceeded to establish such an understanding with the Spanish commandant on the Sabine as permitted him to withdraw his force across the Mississippi and to enter on measures for opposing the projected enterprise. In Kentucky, a premature attempt to bring Burr to justice without sufficient evidence for his conviction had produced a popular impression in his favor and a general disbelief of his guilt. This gave him an unfortunate opportunity of hastening his acquittance. The arrival of the proclamation and orders and the application and information of our confidential agent at length awakened the authorities of that state to the truth, and then produced the same promptitude and energy of which the neighboring state had set the example. Alright, so Jefferson presents the information to Congress that he's at least aware of, which isn't much in terms of actually understanding the plan, only in understanding that some secret and unscrupulous activities are taking place, and that it involves relations with the Spanish commandant. From this address, it's also clear that he has no reason to suspect General Wilkinson, who up until late last year was actually working with Burr to forward the plan, and who is in fact Special Agent number 13 that we discussed in 1806 in regards to the Spanish authorities being tipped off about Pike's expedition. In fact, his double life as a spy never comes out in his lifetime and is only discovered through later historians reviewing papers. Jefferson writes to the two-faced general on February 3rd of this year, I am thoroughly sensible of the painful difficulties of your situation, expecting an attack from an overwhelming force, unversed in law, surrounded by suspected persons, and in a nation tender as to everything infringing liberty, and especially from the military. You have doubtless seen a good deal of malicious insinuation in the papers against you. This, of course, begot suspicion and distrust in those unacquainted with the line of your conduct. We who knew it have not failed to strengthen the public confidence in you, and I can assure you that your conduct as now known has placed you on ground extremely favorable with the public. Burr and his emissaries found it convenient to sow a distrust in your mind of our dispositions towards you, but be assured that you will be cordially supported in the line of your duties. I pray you to send me D's original letter, communicated through Briggs, by the first, entirely safe conveyance. Accept my friendly salutations and assurances of esteem and respect. All of that mostly catches us up to today, February 13th, where Burr is caught red-handed after making a run for it, as his name was already dragged through the mud in the press, and his plot has been uncovered by Jefferson. What comes next is one of the many cases in American history to earn the reputation of trial of the century. It is one of the only 30 to 40 times that treason has ever been charged as an offense, and remains the singular time in American history that a former vice president is charged with treason. To clarify, as of the time of recording, no sitting president, no sitting vice president, no former president, and only one former vice president has ever received this charge, that singular former vice president being Aaron Burr. Now, in a little bit of preparation to cover this landmark case, let's refamiliarize ourselves with Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, which reads, "Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted." Constitutionally, of course, there is no specific sentence for treason. But 3 years after the writing of the Constitution, Congress, in passing the Federal Crimes Act, specifically made treason a capital offense, the act saying that if any person or persons owing allegiance to the United States of America shall levy war against them or shall adhere to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, and shall thereof convicted on confession in open court, or on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act of the treason, whereof he or they shall stand indicted, such person or persons shall be adjudged guilty of treason against the United States, and shall suffer death. So for Burr, the stakes could literally not be higher, as this case works its way through the legal process slowly and carefully. A verdict is to be returned in September, so we'll catch back up with the case then. But for now, let's get on with the rest of this year's updates. Throughout the winter, Zebulon Pike has been continuing his journey through the Rocky Mountains and has discovered what's now known as the Great Sand Dunes. Pike wrote, "When we encamped, I ascended one of the largest hills of sand and with my glass could discover a large river. The sand hills extended up and down the foot of the White Mountains about 15 miles, and appeared to be about 5 miles in width. Their appearance was exactly that of a sea in storm, except as to color." This January entry in his journal is the first known description of the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. The group continues across the valley floor and builds a small fort near the confluence of the Rio Grande and Conejos rivers as we approach the end of winter. However, on February 26th of this year, Zebulon Pike and his men are captured by Spanish authorities. They are detained so that they can be taken to Chihuahua, Mexico, where they are questioned as spies. We'll catch back up with Pike and his men in July when they are eventually released, but for now, in what I'd argue is the first ever time a trigger law is passed in the United States, though I haven't seen anyone else define it that way, Congress passes an act on March 2nd, which reads, "Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that from and after the 1st day of January 1808, it shall not be lawful to import or bring into the United States or the territories thereof from any foreign kingdom, place, or country any Negro, mulatto, or person of color, with intent to hold, sell, or dispose of such Negro, mulatto, or person of color as a slave, or to be held to service or labor. And be it further enacted that no citizen or citizens of the United States or any other person shall, from and after the 1st day of January in the year of our Lord 1808, for himself or themselves or any other person whatsoever, either as master, factor, or owner, build, fit, equip, load, or otherwise prepare any ship or vessel in any port or place within the jurisdiction of the United States, nor shall cause any ship or vessel to sail from any port or place within the same, for the purpose of procuring any Negro, mulatto, or person of color from any foreign kingdom, place, or country, to be transported to any port or place whatsoever within the jurisdiction of the United States, to be held, sold, or disposed of as slaves, or to be held to service or labor, and if any ship or vessel shall be so fitted for the purpose aforesaid, or shall be caused to sail so as foresaid, every such ship or vessel, her tackle, apparel, and furniture shall be forfeited to the United States, and shall be liable to be seized, prosecuted, and condemned in any of the circuit courts or district courts for the district where the said ship or vessel may be found or seized. The Act goes on for a total of 10 sections, each clarifying a specific way in which the law will be applied to punish those who knowingly buy, trade, or keep slaves who are to be imported after the date, or to knowingly aid in any way the transportation of such slaves, and clarifies jurisdictional limits. The point is that after the 1st of January next year, the earliest time prescribed by the Constitution that such laws can be passed, no new slaves will be legally brought into the United States or its territories, and anyone found to be skirting these laws will face a harsh punishment. Like I said, the reason that I consider this a trigger law is that it's set to go into effect on the 1st of January 1808, and the Constitution specifically prohibits Congress from making any law prohibiting the importation of slaves until that date. So, while most trigger laws are passed to go into effect on the instant of a court decision or a federal law, this one happens to be the only trigger law that is set to go into effect as the result of a constitutional clause's expiration. We'll cover the actual enactment of this act in tomorrow's episode. The day after this act is approved in Congress on March 3rd, the Insurrection Act of 1807 is signed into law by President Thomas Jefferson, and it states ever so briefly, "In all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the laws, either of the United States or of any individual state or territory, where it is lawful for the President of the United States to call forth the militia for the purpose of suppressing such insurrection, or of causing the laws to be duly executed, it shall be lawful for him to employ, for the same purposes, such part of the land or naval force of the United States as shall be judged necessary, having first observed all the prerequisites of the law in that respect." This act increases the resources the President may use in case of a need for their services, as it's unlikely in the case of a naval insurrection that the militia will have the needed firepower and the U.S. forces may be required. By allowing the actual armed forces of the United States to be used, even in insurrection, say the size of the one that Burr was planning to launch, or aided by multiple state militias, is likely to face an insurmountable force, though time will tell. Now, there's an interesting question I'd like to pose to you, the listener of this show. When did Great Britain actually view America as a sovereign nation? Formally, you could quote the 83 Treaty of Paris in saying, "His Britannic Majesty acknowledges the said United States to be free, sovereign, and independent states, that he treats with them as such, and for himself, his heirs and successors, relinquishes all claims to the government, propriety, and territorial rights of the same, and every part thereof." Even after the signing and sealing of that document, however, the British remained in the American frontier. You could say that it was once the British left the last forts in the West, yet the fur trade continues surreptitiously in the uncharted lands that Lewis and Clark just returned from. British ships have been sporadically impressing American sailors on the high seas around Europe, and today, another event raises the question, does Great Britain actually see America as a sovereign nation? Beginning in the winter of last year, several British naval vessels blockaded French ships in the Chesapeake Bay, and a number of Royal Navy seamen unhappy with their duties and living conditions deserted these ships, and local American authorities gave them sanctuary. Some deserters were at the Gosport Navy Yard, commanded by Stephen Decatur, who we last mentioned in relation to the Barbary Wars when he ordered the burning of the pirate-held USS Philadelphia. The British consul sends a letter ordering Decatur to turn them over, claiming the men had enlisted in the United States Navy, which is currently also recruiting a crew for the USS Chesapeake, which is currently in the Washington Navy Yard. In an action tied to enforcing the demands made in this letter, Vice Admiral Sir George Berkeley dispatches his flagship, the HMS Leopard, with written orders authorizing boarding and searching of the United States warship Chesapeake to recover any deserters. Today, on June 22nd, the Chesapeake is off the coast of Norfolk when Captain Humphreys spots it and orders the ship to submit to a search. The American Commodore James Barron denies the British captain's demand to allow the search of the ship and questioning of his men, likely aware of the trend of the British Navy impressing Native Americans who had never served the British in any capacity. Now, I'll quote from the Naval Institute as they recount in great detail and reliably source their information. Gazing toward the American frigate, Captain Humphreys called out something about being compelled to comply with orders. Commodore Barron, delaying for precious minutes, replied that he could not hear. The first ball flew athwart the Chesapeake's bow, soon followed by another. Then broadside after broadside was hurled into the frigate. Men were soon drenched in the blood of their companions, as they cringed behind the silent guns. Only 7 powder horns out of 54 on board were filled. The slow matches were not primed. Even the loggerheads were cold. Commodore Barron could only stand by and watch his ship beaten into splinters while his own batteries stayed mute. 7 times wounded himself, he could not comprehend the inactivity of his soldiers. Captain Hall later testified that Barron, observing some of the rigging shot away, cried, "For God's sake, gentlemen, will nobody do his duty? Look at those braces! And that rigging! Why are not stoppers put upon them?" In the confusion, Barron's latent distrust of his officers must have been confirmed by what he considered disloyalty and dereliction of duty. Some minutes later, Barron requested Hall to go down to the gun deck and ask them, for God's sake, to fire 1 gun for the honor of the flag. I mean to strike! Using a hot coal from the galley, a lone gun was fired by Lieutenant Allen at the very moment when the Commodore ordered the colors struck. With 3 men dead, 1 dying, and 19 men wounded, including himself, Barron surrenders. Humphrey, however, refuses to accept the surrender and boards the Chesapeake to search for deserters, where he finds 4, though only 1 is a British citizen, the other 3 being American. The British citizen is soon hanged for his offense, while the 3 Americans receive sentences of 500 lashes each. The event, as you'd hope, causes national outrage when it's reported, and Jefferson issues a proclamation on July 2nd, which we'll get to in just one moment.
During the wars which for some time have unhappily prevailed among the powers of Europe, the United States of America, firm in their principles of peace, have endeavored, by justice, by a regular discharge of all their national and social duties, and by every friendly office their situation has admitted, to maintain with all the belligerents their accustomed relations of friendship, hospitality, and commercial intercourse, taking no part in the questions which animate these powers against each other, nor permitting themselves to entertain a wish, but for the restoration of general peace. They have observed with good faith the neutrality they assumed, and they believe that no instance of a departure from its duties can be justly imputed to them by any nation. A free use of their harbors and waters, the means of refitting and of refreshment, of succor to their sick and suffering, have at all times and on equal principles been extended to all, and this, too, amidst a constant recurrence of acts of insubordination to the laws, of violence to the persons, and of trespasses on the property of our citizens committed by officers of one of the belligerent parties received among us. In truth, these abuses of the laws of hospitality have, with few exceptions, become habitual to the commanders of the British armed vessels hovering on our coasts and frequenting our harbors. They have been the subject of repeated representations to their government. Assurances have been given that proper orders should restrain them within the limits of the rights and of the respect due to a friendly nation, but those orders and assurances have been without effect. No instance of punishment for past wrongs has taken place. At length, a deed transcending all we have hitherto seen or suffered brings the public sensibility to a serious crisis and our forbearance to a necessary pause. A frigate of the United States, trusting to a state of peace and leaving her harbor on a distant service, has been surprised and attacked by a British vessel of superior force, one of a squadron then lying in our waters and covering the transaction, and has been disabled from service, with the loss of a number of men killed and wounded. This enormity was not only without provocation or justifiable cause, but was committed with the avowed purpose of taking by force, from a ship of war of the United States, a part of her crew, and that no circumstance might be wanting to mark its character. It had been previously ascertained that the seamen demanded were native citizens of the United States. Having effected her purpose, she returned to anchor with her squadron within our jurisdiction. Hospitality under such circumstances ceases to be a duty, and a continuance of it with such uncontrolled abuses would tend only, by multiplying injuries and irritations, to bring on a rupture between the two nations. This extreme resort is equally opposed to the interests of both, as it is to assurances of the most friendly dispositions on the part of the British government, in the midst of which this outrage has been committed. In this light, the subject cannot but present itself to that government, and strengthen the motives to an honorable reparation of the wrong which has been done, and to that effectual control of its naval commanders, which alone can justify the government of the United States in the exercise of those hospitalities it is now constrained to discontinue. In consideration of these circumstances, and of the right of every nation to regulate its own police, to provide for its peace and for the safety of its citizens, and consequently to refuse the admission of armed vessels into its harbors or waters, either in such numbers or of such descriptions as are inconsistent with these, or with the maintenance of the authority of the laws, I have thought proper, in pursuance of the authorities specially given by law, to issue this my proclamation, hereby requiring all armed vessels bearing commissions under the government of Great Britain now within the harbors or waters of the United States, immediately and without any delay, to depart from the same, and interdicting the entrance of all the said harbors and waters to the said armed vessels, and to all others bearing commissions under the authority of the British government, and if the said vessels or any of them shall fall to depart as aforesaid, or if they or any others so interdicted, shall hereafter enter the harbors or waters aforesaid, I do in that case forbid all intercourse with them, or any of them, their officers or crews, and do prohibit all supplies and aid from being furnished to them, or any of them. And I do declare and make known that if any person from or within the jurisdictional limits of the United States shall afford any aid to any such vessel contrary to the prohibition contained in this proclamation, either in repairing any such vessel or in furnishing her, her officers or crew, with supplies of any kind, or in any manner whatsoever, or if any pilot shall assist in navigating any of the said armed vessels, unless it be for the purpose of carrying them in the first instance beyond the limits and jurisdiction of the United States, or unless it be in the case of a vessel forced by distress, or charged with public dispatches, as hereinafter provided for, such person or persons shall on conviction suffer all the pains and penalties by the laws provided for such offenses. And I do hereby enjoin and require all persons bearing office, civil or military, within or under the authority of the United States, and all others, citizens or inhabitants thereof, or being within the same, with vigilance and promptitude to exert their respective authorities, and to be aiding and assisting to the carrying this proclamation, and every part thereof, into full effect. Provided, nevertheless, that if any such vessel shall be forced into the harbors or waters of the United States by distress, by the dangers of the sea, or by the pursuit of an enemy, or shall enter them charged with dispatches or business from their government, or shall be a public packet for the conveyance of letters and dispatches, the commanding officer, immediately reporting his vessel to the collector of the district, stating the object or causes of entering the said harbors or waters, and conforming himself to the regulations in that case prescribed under the authority of the laws, shall be allowed the benefit of such regulations, respecting repairs, supplies, stay, intercourse, and departure as shall be permitted under the same authority. In testimony whereof I have caused the seal of the United States to be affixed to these presents, and signed the same, given at the city of Washington, the 2nd day of July, Anno Domini 1807, and of the sovereignty and independence of the United States the 31st.
A solid response, and Britain, for their part, disavows the actions of Humphreys, and he's given no further command duties, though, like in other instances of such similar situations, goes largely unpunished, and Britain refuses to renounce the policy of impressment of American sailors. Barron, the American Commodore, is actually court-martialed as well for failing to have his ship prepared for the encounter, and is suspended from the Navy for 5 years without pay. On June 30th, Zebulon Pike returns to the United States, being escorted to the border by his captors. 5 of the men, for reasons not altogether clear, were detained for 2 years longer, and Sergeant William C. Meek, after killing Private Theodore Miller in a drunken scuffle, was held in Spanish captivity for 14 years. When Pike is received back into the United States, he's faced with accusations that he is somehow party to the ongoing case regarding Aaron Burr, which it does not seem that he had any knowledge of whatsoever. Contemporaries, however, harbor lingering suspicions, and it's not helpful for Pike's case that all of his records and papers have gone missing because the Spanish confiscated them. Now, about 100 years later, in 1907, they will be found, and they are exactly the kind of notations that you would expect an explorer, not a spy, to have made. These letters found in 1907 truly vindicate Pike's reputation, and his manuscripts and maps leave little doubt that he was truly just lost, not trying to meet up with Spanish authorities. In his lifetime, Pike wrote often, sometimes jealously, of the Lewis and Clark expedition that was somewhat concurrent with his, and while history doesn't remember Zebulon Pike as quite the explorer as Meriwether Lewis or William Clark, the part that he plays in exploring the American West, the Rocky Mountains, still is remembered by those who live in the Rockies today. Now, in summer, we get another story of American innovation. The first commercially successful passenger steamboat begins operation on August 17th and is launched from New York City, set to travel to Albany at approximately 5 miles an hour. It's the result of hard work and innovation by a man named James Fulton. This North River steamboat, which is later renamed the Clermont, is about 142 feet long and has a maximum width of between 18 feet, and it's powered by 2 19-horsepower steam-driven paddle wheels on each side, located about centrally, as well as by a proportionately small square sail in the front and a spanker. The steamer's inaugural run is helmed by Captain Andrew Brink. With 32 hours of travel time, the steamship successfully makes it to Albany, and the return trip takes about 29 hours. James Fulton writes to his friend, Joel Barlow, "I had a light breeze against me the whole way, both going and coming, and the voyage has been performed wholly by the power of the steam engine. I overtook many sloops and schooners, beating to the windward, and parted with them as if they had been at anchor. The power of propelling boats by steam is now fully proved. The morning I left New York, there were not perhaps 30 persons in the city who believed that the boat would ever move 1 mile an hour, or be of the least utility. And while we were putting off from the wharf, which was crowded with spectators, I heard a number of sarcastic remarks. Having employed much time, money, and zeal in accomplishing this work, it gives me, as it will you, great pleasure to see it fully answer my expectations." Now, on the 1st of September, a verdict is returned in the case of United States v. Burr. But let's examine the core questions of the case, as they are just as, if not more interesting than the plot that has led to it. I'm no lawyer, so I'll be quoting here from the Federal Judicial Center's website. Now, before we begin, let's take a moment to note that the judge presiding in this case, brought in Virginia, is the same John Marshall that Hamilton wrote to years ago, warning him of Burr's dangerous character. Clearly, as we will see, Marshall is very good at remaining impartial, as is his job. Now, quoting from the FJC. From the standpoint of constitutional law, the Burr trial is notable for Chief Justice Marshall's landmark decision narrowly construing the Constitution's definition of treason and thereby making conviction of this crime exceedingly difficult. The government charged Burr with the first of these two crimes of treason, levying war against the United States. The government prosecutors alleged that Burr levied war against the United States as part of a conspiracy to establish a separate confederacy composed of the Western states and territories. Burr's case by now had become deeply embroiled in politics, with Republicans supporting President Jefferson's measure to bring the accused traitor to justice, and Federalists rallying to defend Burr against the charges. Many in heavily Republican Virginia were inclined to believe Burr had acted traitorously, and this popular belief made jury selection more difficult and time-consuming. After the opening of the spring term of the United States Circuit Court on May 22nd, a grand jury of 16 is sworn in, and Chief Justice Marshall delivered a charge that was not published but reportedly focused on the definition and nature of treason and the testimony requisite to prove it. Burr's counsel seized the offense by attacking the prosecution and its motives. Burr wanted the president to turn over a letter and papers received from Wilkinson, together with copies of the president's reply and certain directives issued by the Departments of War and Navy. The motion raised the fundamental question of whether the federal judiciary could issue such a subpoena to the president without violating the constitutional principle of separation of powers. Chief Justice Marshall granted the motion for a subpoena, maintaining that the president was not exempt from court orders designed to protect the constitutional rights of criminal defendants. By the terms of the subpoena, the president was to provide the documents but did not have to appear personally. Jefferson did not acknowledge the court's order, but informed U.S. Attorney Hay that he had substantively complied with the subpoena's term by previously delivering the requested documents to the prosecutor. In doing so, Jefferson claimed to act voluntarily and did not acknowledge the judiciary's right to compel him to release executive papers. He also maintained that in the interests of national security, the president must be the sole judge of which papers could be safely disclosed. The government's case hinged on proving that Burr's military enterprise had a treasonable design. The lawyers rummaged through the whole course of English and American precedents on the law of treason. All of the argumentation boiled down to the meaning of levying war in the treason clause of the Constitution. The prosecution pressed for a broad definition by which the gathering of armed men on the island constituted an overt act of levying war. Ultimately, Marshall ruled that the indictment was flawed in alleging that Burr levied war on Blennerhassen's Island. Instead, it should have stated the truth, that the accused was absent and that his treason consisted in procuring the assemblage. Such procurement was the overt act that would have to be proved by two witnesses. None of the testimony could establish this overt act. With no further testimony to consider, the jury had virtually no choice but to acquit. In an unusual twist, however, the verdict, instead of a simple not guilty, declared Burr not guilty by the evidence presented. The decision of August 31st effectively ended the trial of Aaron Burr and spared him the penalty of death by hanging. His ordeal in court lasted another month and a half, however. The government half-heartedly tried him on the misdemeanor charge of waging war on Spain. This trial, too, ended in acquittal, on grounds similar to the earlier acquittal. Alright, thank you to the FJC for that summary. After the government chose not to pursue further charges in the District of Ohio, by September 1st, Aaron Burr yet again has stared down capital crimes and walks away a free man. If not done in by the incident with Hamilton, Aaron Burr's public reputation is forever stained, his political career over, yet remarkably, he eventually resumes a law practice, operating in New York City as a lawyer until his death nearly 3 decades from now. Back in Washington, D.C., construction has been slowly progressing on the United States Capitol building, and the House of Representatives meets in a new space on October 26th, the start of the 10th Congress, which comes to be known as the Hall of the House. On December 22nd, President Thomas Jefferson initiates an unprecedented policy experiment by enacting a complete embargo on maritime commerce with congressional support. What this Embargo Act of 1807 does is prohibit American trade with foreign powers, full stop. It's enacted in response to British and French interference with American merchant ships during the Napoleonic Wars, and is aimed to force these nations to respect American neutrality. By this point, Jefferson already knows he's not going to be seeking re-election, though constitutionally there's no reason not to, and as we'll see, this Embargo Act proves to be a major political problem for the Republicans. Still, it's meant to be one way to inflict some pressure to these warring European powers without going into any hot war. One last thing that I'll mention relatively generally speaking before we wrap up this episode is that in response to the coming deadline of January 1st, 1808, at which point slaves will no longer be able to be legally brought into the United States, America sees its largest single-year influx of slaves brought into the country, reports generally citing a number somewhere around 24,000 in a single calendar year. If that number is accurate, that would be over a 20th of all Africans ever brought into the United States, including the states as they were colonies before 76. Like, we're talking Columbus to present, that would be over a 20th. Every single graph that you'll see for slave importation into America shows it going up rather substantially as we approach the 19th century, so it's not unbelievable, but it's just a hard number to get your head around. Another number hard to get your head around is that of these approximately 24,000, over 21,000 were brought through the port in Charleston, South Carolina alone. Perhaps that's a weird place to leave it, but that's all I've got for 1807. Hopefully you've been enjoying the show. If you have, please take a moment to share it with somebody that you know, either online or, if better yet, in person. This whole show started because I wanted to inform myself about American history better, but with America's 250th anniversary coming up, I decided to go through each year and release an episode sharing everything that I could find out about the year. So we'll be continuing to do that, but share the show and get more people hyped up, get more people knowledgeable in time for America's 250th anniversary. I'm Hayden Spencer, and this has been Our Story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.